The 4 o'clock work session of the Douglas County Commission. Our work session today is on the Douglas County Correctional Facility Space Reallocation Study Update. Just a reminder for the public, we take no action during our work sessions. It's just for informational purposes only, and we do not take public comment. We do have public comment available during our general business meeting at 5:30. And if you'd like to comment on what you heard at the work session, that would be a great time to do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah and our guests.
Thank you, commissioners. The sheriff and I spoke a while back about wanting to get an opportunity for this team to talk to the commission about the work that Trainer Architects did related to possible reconfiguration of the space of the jail, and just really sort of have an open conversation. Our director of capital projects, Jay Zimmershed, will run the PowerPoint, and so I'll just turn it over to the sheriff at this point. If there's anything you want to say before we get started.
Yes. So, or am I not even on?
You have to you do have to flip the switch.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So, without going too deep into the history of this, obviously, beginning in 2020, when I took over, we already knew that we were facing some situations within the facility as far as housing of the people who are incarcerated. But we were also in the middle of a pandemic. And so through the pandemic, we were able to get the partners in the criminal justice system came together and basically jettisoned a huge percentage of the people that were being housed in jail. Previous to that time, we were staying, our daily average population with folks that were in the facility and out of facility was 225, upwards of 260 even, with about 50 to 60 being housed in other counties. Post-pandemic, we've maintained a daily average population of around 140, mid 140s. And while we still house a very small number of people out of county, upwards somewhere around 10 per day is kind of where we tend to stay. That's simply because we only have one county that will accept currently. So, but our jail population stays down, which is fantastic. But what that has done is it has created a unique dynamic in that our bed capacity is 186. However, 77 of those beds are not behind a locked door, or if they have a door, it can be locked, but it does not have a toilet facility and wash station inside the cell. So therefore the person cannot be locked in. That they can, in our minimum pod, you can choose to lock your doors, basically like a bedroom door, but we cannot lock people in there because they don't have the facilities inside there. So we have 77 beds within that facility that are not behind locked doors. With our daily population, somewhere around 145, we'll just say 135 to 150, these folks have been typically vetted, and they are either being held there for the nature of their charges, which is typically very serious, or through aggravating circumstances through their case, such as multiple failures to appear, holds from courts. I've spoken at great length about the folks that we're housing that are waiting to go to Larned. In fact, today is the 1-year anniversary of the longest serving person who is waiting to go to Larned. As of today, he's been waiting for 1 year. So, and we have 12 people on the list currently. So we have a lower number of inmates or detainees, persons being housed every day, but I'm going to pick the wrong word here, but the severity and the makeup of these individuals are much more serious and dangerous. So it's kind of a quantity versus quality. We have a lower quantity, but the quality of inmate is much more resource intensive. Let's just say that. So we only have 100 and some odd beds behind locked doors. We have 150 people. Not a one of them belong behind a not locked door, but we have to because that's the only space we have. So what has happened is our old work release, which is basically an open style dormitory, is now our minimum. And then our minimum is now our medium. Our medium is now our maximum. Our maximum is now supermax and special needs, SMI. So folks who are extremely either dangerous or resource intensive And then we also have a separate unit now that we use for special management. So folks who are in on charges, typically it's charges that they can't be around other inmates due to the severity of and nature of their charge. And then on top of that, you have the women's. It is all of those things in one little unit. And to be fair, the inequity in their unit is glaring because they're the only unit that has double bunks. So each cell is able to house 2 females. We do our very, very utmost best to avoid that, just because it's not fair and nobody wants somebody living in your room where the toilet and sink and everything is right there all day long. However, it's just the way that it is. It's the way it has to be, unfortunately, in certain instances. But we want to point that out, that that's something we hope to rectify. So through all of that, the county was gracious enough to allow us to start working with Trainer to look at a plan to not make a bigger jail with more beds, but utilizing the bed space that we currently have in a more functional and safe and humane way. So when I say that we have a 186 bed facility, our hope is to remain at 186 beds, but I want our functional capacity to go from 135-ish to 186. So that's the driver behind this project. Let's just go ahead and say it. The word expansion is going to be used at some point. But what I would like to point out is that anytime the word expansion in this project is used, is simply to talk about the footprint of our building, but nothing else will be expanded. We will need a small increase in staffing, but for the most part, this is simply to allow us to better use the current building that we have in a way more effective way that I hope can sustain us for many years, but obviously we don't know the future. So with that, is there anything else that I can answer for you before we get into anything else or the next step? Okay.
Excellent. I can take the cue. Good. Thank you. That was great.
All right.
So some of you know me, some of you don't. Some have seen me before and you'll see me again later today. So I'm Jeff Lane and I'm with Trainer HL, and the sheriff did a great job of explaining the conversation and the goals and the expectations that he set out for our team at the very beginning of this study. So I want to circle back a tad bit, because I think that part of what some of you have seen, whether it's as a commissioner or as a public individual, may be some of the work that we've done in the past. And how this study starts to come back and circle up to that, I'm going to tie in at the tail end. But I wanted to share a little bit about some of the previous study work that we have done and how that started to inform the direction that we are going, or at least thinking about going, with the sheriff today. So as some of you may have seen, we looked at mental health and behavioral health unit here at the existing facility, with some ability for expansion to the east, with some housing elements, and then re-entry and programs there to the south. So that was kind of the gist of what we studied and looked at, and that was all in conjunction with conversations about pretrial and other services that could be had at the courts and judicial system, as well as a crisis recovery treatment center that's now completed as well. So all of those are kind of that stool element that we work towards. So with that, we circled up with the sheriff. You can go to the next slide there, and started to actually think about how we can do what the sheriff's asking, which is, I don't want to expand beds, but I want to provide a handful of things. I want to provide housing that is appropriate for the people that need to be in jail. Okay. And then staff, providing proper staff areas that can allow them to expand programs and reentry, as well as some training abilities that they currently don't have. So here is the lower level, and I want to think about this as a pre-class unit. So you're going to see that as we move through each of these slides. And part of that's because what we were looking at here is the idea that this unit, and you'll see it as it stacks together, allows them to either use it as a housing component, right? Or use it as a pre-class component for both male and female.
Yeah.
Excellent. So pre-class is the ability for a 72 hours to 24-hour time frame where it allows for sheriff and his staff to understand who the individual is that's coming to jail. Some of those individuals they already know, right? They just know who they are, unfortunately or fortunately. And so those individuals may go directly to a classification that they've already got. There's other individuals that come for either the first time, or maybe this is the second, but it's been 10 years and their attitude, the way they are, has changed. This allows them to have a unit that those individuals, whoever they may be, can go to. The sheriff's staff can understand who they are. Can they be with other folks, right? In a capacity that works. Are they agitated, irritated? Do they have a mental or behavioral piece that they need to have services or other pieces that need to happen? All of that can happen within that first 24 to 72 hours through screening and just observation and what have you. So those are the types of things that we're looking at here for this type of unit. Does that help? Excellent. So here in the lower level, we looked at how do we actually capture space that may be a tad bit easier to capture today than it would be later. And being able to capture space that I think is, there needs to be mechanical, electrical, and plumbing space for this area. So that to the left is kind of what we looked at, but also providing a staff entry space that actually starts to allow for both staff here to do some training, office space, but then also to think about other entities that may come for training and to be able to do that on the back side of the building in lieu of bringing everybody through the front or what have you. So that was kind of the idea and intent here at this location. Next one, Jay. So then on the main level, what you'll see there, let me see if I've got a little pointer on this item. Oh yeah. So this area is the work release area that the sheriff was talking about that's currently he's having minimum in. So this area is 46 beds, and the area that you're going to see, or the footprint that you're going to see, is 4 units that have a mezzanine that's then stacked. So a total of 8 units altogether that have 7 cells in them, or 7 sleeping areas in them. So that totals out to be 56 beds. So the idea here is that we capture this space for what I'll show you in a little bit for staff and programs and reentry, and then be able to actually have the proper units for housing individuals in a pre-class type unit space. The layout that we've got here is actually a direct indirect supervision. So this area right here is the control room. It can be 1, 2 individuals. That can be a staff component that allows for that individual or individuals to actually observe what's going on in that whole entire floor area. So they're observing half of that 56 in their own entity right there, plus the exercise area that we've got here. We also incorporated programs, counseling spaces, and some additional staff areas here for this connection. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a little bit in one of the other slides is a single point of connection, okay, for security purposes. And so remember this layout, we can come back to it, but I wanted to share that just to think about that a little bit. This does have a mezzanine level to it. And if Jay wants to flip to that one next, that'd be great.
Oh, sorry, wrong roller.
That's okay.
Is it okay if I jump in with a
Sure.
quick question?
Yeah.
This is Commissioner Reed. We just help give a little background and maybe comparisons, probably best question for you, Sheriff Armbruster. Well, maybe a definition about what work release is, and just in clarification about that, and how those numbers, do they compare to what we currently have for those units, or is part of this reshuffling, sort of adjusting of where the beds are and where the numbers are higher.
Thank you. As he was saying that, I was thinking I should jump in here. So as he pointed out, that work release unit down there on the bottom hand right, blue, it is a 2-story mezzanine open air dormitory style. It has external entrance and ingress and egress. And what it was initially designed for, first off, it was built as a 56 bed. That was where we took 10 beds away to build the outdoor rec area. But the folks would come and go to work, males only, would come and go to work through this external. They would never enter the secure portion of the building. So therefore, we would have folks, and work release is only ordered by a judge. That's the only person that can approve it. And there's a myriad of reasons why people would end up on work release. However, and if we want to talk about my feelings on how work release should not be utilized in the jail, and as we move forward, that's a good conversation for us to have as well. But for now, there's no reason for us to have a work release unit. And so in order to, and to your point is that in order for us to add a piece off the back with housing, we have to pull housing from some other place within the facility. So those 46 beds that are in the work release unit currently would all be pulled out. And I know that, and then the conspiracy theorists out there listening would be like, oh, all you're going to do is just going to pull them out and then you're going to put them back in and then you're going to be back up plus 46. No, we're going to shell that thing out, turn the bottom level into more administrative offices, the top level into reentry and programs rooms. And that will no longer even be available as a housing unit. So that's where 46. So when I say that we're going to stay under our bed count, what we're going to do is we're going to pull those 46 beds out. And then we're also going to take all the double bunks out of the women's housing unit. So that's 14 and 46 for a total of 60 beds being pulled out of the jail. And then adding this unit off the back, which is 56 beds. So does that kind of get to where, okay, that if you have any other questions, please do ask. And what I'll say too is we keep talking about pre-class unit, but the beauty of this style of build is modular in that the 2 floors will have 4 individual pods and they will be pie shaped. And one day we may have a higher population of females. So 2 of those 4 can be females, or we have a high pre-class. 4 of 4 can be pre-class and the women's can be moved back to the women's housing unit or something. It gives us options. We may have an outbreak of say COVID, we may need to quarantine several people. We could clear that entire thing out and make it entirely a quarantine unit. We would have to do some shuffling, but it gives us options to change. So that way, one thing is not just built specifically for work release. One thing is not built specifically for minimum, which has brought us to where we are today, in that those things are so tied into what they are, you can't move away from them. Just like work release is open air, it doesn't work for our population. Minimum has unlocked doors, it's not working for our population. So this gives us much more flexibility to use the beds as the needs arise for us. You bet.
So as the sheriff said, the idea here is to infill this space and become become staff and programs. The other piece that we wanted to do here as we studied is how do we capture this circulation path here to actually gather in custody or staff into this space, and we are able to do that. We would be replacing the elevator at that location, but we'd be able to do that to be able to capture that type of space. The idea also is to go ahead and add, because this the booking area here actually has the same height and build height as all the other areas. We are planning to add, let's see, that'd be 6 booking cells in that area to help capacity. One of the things, if you haven't had the opportunity, but you might want to sometime take a look at that space. They don't have a very good ability for padded cells or individual isolation type components that allow for individuals to come and are distraught. So being able to capture some additional areas here on the upper level would allow them to be able to capture some of those types of spaces on the lower portion that would be more observatory by the staff. The mezzanine, again, is fairly simple, stairs that come up into those spaces and still capture the same amount of bed count that we talked about. Next one. So then as we go and stack to the next level, this is the main level of the next housing component, right? Stacks on top. Here in a minute, I'll show you a section so you can kind of grasp that. There's nothing different here than what you just saw on the main level. What I will tell you is, as I said before, I think previous times that we've looked at this, we've tried and we've thought about having a connection to allow us to get from this level to this housing area. And after doing some studying and actually thinking about how a pre-class unit wants to work here, we would suggest only one location for that connection at the main level. Having some elevators to move individuals up and down, but no real connection back to this third level here on the main level. And that does a lot of different things from a safe and secure perspective, as well as just overall constructability as we looked at the project itself. Libraries and the program space stays the same. And then, as I stated earlier, we do have program and counseling space and those types of areas off of this main corridor space on each level. So that does allow for those individuals and agencies to come and be a part of what's going on right there on the floor, in lieu of having to move in custody around a lot of places. That was the other piece here, is trying to keep them in a location that makes sense and have people come to them until they move to the housing capacity or housing areas and classification areas they need to. Next one. Again, the mezzanine level, fairly similar to what you saw earlier. And then you can see here the female area that the sheriff's been talking a little bit about, and how we aren't doing anything there other than changing out those beds. Next one. Yeah.
So in terms of the women that you talked about, so just removing those additional beds doesn't give you more space for
Right.
women. So what's the plan there? Is it just to be able to use the flex space?
Yes, so our hope would be is, because early on I'd wanted to have like a women's minimum and a women's medium and a women's maximum, because they're all grouped together and that affects their free times on top of just their living conditions. So of the 8 modular units, the pre-class units, we could take 1, 2, or 3 of them depending on our population, and just this eight person mod would be women's minimum, and they would get all the same things that women's or men's minimum would receive as far as free times and abilities. This one would be women's medium, and so we could expand it based on we could utilize those spaces based on the needs of the current population. Does that kind of answer the question? And then the current women's units could be, and frankly, the way it's built, it's more geared towards some sort of a secure, like a men's medium or maximum or special management type style. So we would probably either use it simply for a certain classification of our women's population, or we would move them out completely into the modular units and utilize that for some other thing. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to convey here is that this gives us so much more flexibility.
So would the pre-class units or these flex units also have the same amount of either exercise space or free time space that the regular pods would have?
Yes. So we have a set schedule. So let's just use men's medium, since that's our largest. They have a set schedule to where it's broken in half, and this half of the room, well, it's broken in half now because half of it's actual maximum and half of them are actual mediums, and they can't be out together, but they have a set schedule. You're out from this hour to this hour on free time. You're out for this hour for programs, or this hour for meals. And those would transfer over to whatever unit. So if we have our large medium, but we have an overflow, so we would have to use one of the mods for or flex units for a men's medium, they would stay on that same schedule. So that way the consistency would be there, but also the fairness in that if you're in a minimum, you would continue with your minimum privileges, so to speak, or lack thereof in other units.
Jay, can you go back a slide, please? So yep, this is good right here. So one of the other pieces about this type of a configuration and layout is this. So this is the exercise area here. And then, as I stated earlier, some programs and counseling spaces. So one of the other pieces that this type of configuration and design starts to do for the county and for the sheriff is keeping the in custody on that level. So they're not moving around, but they're able to move outside of their unit and go and do things. So there's the ability to be able to give in custody some privileges that you may not be able to give in some of the other housing configurations you currently have. And then also being able to have that control ability here. So that individual is able to watch what's going on. To your question as well. So the other piece that could actually occur with this design, the way it's set up, is you could theoretically take this entire level and make it female. Okay. And then you could take the entire lower level and make it male, or vice versa, however you so chose to do that. But you could do those types of things. So that again gives you the ability to grow some of the the classification abilities that you currently don't have. Does that make sense? Excellent. Jay, if you want to.
And you can actually even split those floors into 2 women's and 2 men's, because of the way that they will be designed. They will be completely sequestered from one another. The only limitation that would be our own internal policies as far as males watching female housing units and that kind of stuff, which obviously there's not a lot of laws about that, but we have a lot of rules about that. So, but that would be really the only kind of limitation as far as what population is in each housing unit or in each modular unit.
Right. You can go to sections there at the tail end. So one of the pieces as we started to think about the overall design of this is, again, trying to keep it within the vertical of what you currently have out there, and then also trying to compact it on that site. So this does actually do all of those things, stays within that east portion of the back house area, and then stays within the vertical capacity of what you currently have. So I think those are things that, as we thought about the design and the effort of this, that was important to us. The other piece that this does that your current facility doesn't do is we actually are incorporating a rear chase on the backside of each of those, on the backside of the housing area. And the rear chase would allow for all plumbing, electrical, security electronics, whatever those pieces are that are going to be making the cell work and operate and function the way it needs to on the backside. We still capture all the natural daylighting we want to be able to capture through the back of that, or through some other means that we're trying to do through some skylights and other areas that we have from the glass perspective. But that way, from a maintenance perspective, you're not bringing, whether it's outside maintenance staff or internal maintenance staff, into the housing areas to maintain a lot of things. Those types of items can be maintained on the rear chase. So they can go back there, do the work they need to do, while everything is, from the secure perspective, is happening on the secure side. So those are some things that we brought in to kind of help on an operation and maintenance perspective, as well as thinking about safety and security as it related to this building.
You did mention natural light and windows, and that's something that our current facility is somewhat lacking. I think all of the windows are frosted except maybe in the library. Well, is there a different idea or a different plan for these units?
Yeah, so Jay, if you want to go back a couple slides. So one more. So a couple of neat pieces that we've got going on. So as we've talked about design here, so this area right along here, we would actually anticipate having a bulk of that being glass. High up and or at a level that made some sense. And then we can actually gather natural daylighting across to these areas because they can be low height type spaces, right? So we're capturing natural daylighting into those areas there. This exercise area here, being able to capture that natural daylighting on the outside and then being able to bring that directly in to these spaces here. So that's one way to do it. The other way we also want to think about, so we just, we're completing a project in Saline County right now, a new facility for them. And one of the pieces we really started to think about is how to handle natural daylighting in a fashion that is secure, but gives it a normality to it. So we actually captured that doing these types of things I just talked about, but we also did clear story lighting and some other skylight types items to bring those natural daylightings right into those areas. And I was just out there actually on, let's see, that would be last Wednesday. Yeah, last Wednesday I toured the facility, and the natural daylighting that's coming into those spaces is excellent. And it's not because we designed it, but it's the way it was able to be done. And they're actually not probably going to be using any lighting during the day, whether it's a day like today or whether it's a day when it's a kind of a cloudy day. The amount of glass we're able to capture into those spaces and bring into that area has been excellent. So those are some of the tactics and design elements that we be bringing to the table on this type of space to be able to do those same types of things. Because I think those are very critical as it relates to what we're doing here. We also have these corner areas that we would want to think about how we capture some natural daylighting from that space and bringing that in over the top as well. Does that answer your question? Great. And we can share some images later on as if we get further along.
I want to be clear on what you're proposing here, right? Because there is a new building being built within we're not doing all these changes within the existing facility.
That's correct.
Right? So I think when we talk about the footprint of the building, we have to be clear that this is actually expanding the footprint of the building.
Yep.
But it is not adding any more beds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
In fact, I think if we did it as proposed, it could actually be a net loss of a few beds.
Okay.
Which I'm fine with, because I would be functionally able to hold a lot more safely.
Excellent. So let's get to the real piece that everybody wants to see. So you can digest these numbers for a minute. Before I go into those numbers, I want to share a couple things. First off, this is not an estimate done by us. We actually, because of one of the pieces we wanted to do through this process, Turner Construction was part of our team and helped and assisted in this, and actually did a very detailed estimate to break down a lot of different things to get to where we are today from a numbers perspective. But I wanted to keep it at a high level because for today, I think the idea is to go there. If we need to dive into some pieces and parts, we can. So you can see here, and we did it as a range, as a kind of a high and a low. And the reason behind that is because we haven't made a lot of decisions. We put some stuff on paper and we know what the square footage is and we know what we're trying to get accomplished. We know what a sleeping space looks like in this type of scenario. We know what we're trying to do, but we haven't made all the decisions, right? And so with that, we're looking at a total construction cost about $29 to $37 million from a high-low range. And then a soft cost, which it encompasses contingencies, fees, special inspections and furniture and those types of things, would be between about $8 million on both of those. And that may adjust a tad bit as it relates to the cost too, because those contingency dollars can go a little differently based on the cost. But I wanted to kind of keep them apples to apples. So a total project cost of about $37 million to $45 million at the end of the day to do everything that we've talked about today, as it's based on this element here. What I will share with you is these are in today's dollars, okay? And so as we think about that, and as Turner and I chatted about it the other day, as we look at escalation, which is a really good thing to think about, we all think there's maybe that recession coming in the next, 9-12 months, and that may be real, it may not, we don't know. But from a construction perspective, we would still want to think about a 4 to 10% escalation factor per year. Okay, I know that looks like a wide range, but not knowing the volatility of the market, it'd be really hard to nail down what we used to be able to do, which was a 4 to 6% escalation factor. So that's part of what I would share with you as it relates to these numbers. So today, these may be good. 6 months from now, we may want to readjust, and a year from now, for certain, we'd want to think about it and go back. I mean, that was in one of the other pieces. So I will tell you that the numbers that we had a year ago as we were working through the study was a little bit higher than this. So we've actually seen a little bit of correction, but I'm not sure whether that's real as it moves forward or not. So just caveat the numbers a little bit. I like to do that because numbers are one of those where everybody puts them up here, and then we put a project on the shelf for a year and everybody comes back and goes, great, can you do it for that again? Or we anticipate that. That's the expectations. And I think coming back and revisiting would be in our best interest.
Sheriff Armbruster, can you talk a little bit about the programming space and the reentry and what you're able to do now, or what spaces you use now, and then what this would do for the future?
Absolutely. So what we currently have, so a little history, I suppose. When we built this jail in '99, it came with a programs room and a programs director, which was going to be classes and those kind of things for folks who are currently incarcerated, as well as like therapies. They have art therapy and that kind of thing. It was built with the best of intentions, much like the work release unit. However, it didn't necessarily work out in real life. And we found that space to be extremely unsafe because of just the way it's set up and the lack of surveillance and officers and everything. So we do still utilize it as such, but we've kind of co-opted much of the program space into office space for programs and our reentry team. Now you move forward from 1999 into probably 2014 or so, Sheriff McGovern started this reentry program. And obviously, we all know Mike Brower, and he came in and really got this thing going. I mean, and this unit is, I like to call them elite, but they're like nationwide special good at what they do. But they've also gone into this space as well. So what this new space would do is So actually the current work release unit, like I said, open air mezzanine. So if you stand in the middle of it, there's a giant hole. Just picture like standing in the bottom floor of a mall. There's a giant hole with a railing around it. We would actually fill that in. The bottom floor is already attached through, I mean, there's walls, but is already next to our admin space where we're already out of offices. So that would just be a natural growth into there for staffing needs. But the top floor would be separated from any public areas and everything, obviously, and it would have that ability with like you talked about with the staffing elevator, where we could bring folks from the secure portion into that area. And it would be set up with all of the staffing the reentry and the programs folks will be in there with them, but we'll also have safety measures in place where this can happen in a much safer environment. But it will also be set up with different, I mean, the technology has come so far, and it's really hard to wire in wireless this, that, and the other into a concrete and steel building that is, basically it's barely holding up our plumbing. And so it's very difficult to retrofit, but we would be able to do a lot of things technology wise in order to offer that many more courses, but resources for folks. And so it's really just, but again, I also want to quell the fears that we will turn it back into a housing unit. By the time we're done with this, it won't even be able to be turned back into a housing unit. So I keep saying that, but I hope people will hear it. So is that what you're asking though? Pretty much. Okay.
Are you saying that all of the office space is for programming, or is some of it for sheriff functions?
So the first floor would be for sheriff functions. The second floor would be not only office space for the programs and reentry folks, but it would also be the programs rooms and the different classrooms and that kind of stuff and the technology. So it would be kind of a all-encompassing unit that would have access to the secure portion of the facility so we can move inmates to and fro, but they won't have the ability to get down to that first level, which is now going to be admin or whatever, sheriff's office.
So help me think through this. So we used to have the Lawrence Police Department over at the building just across the yard here, and the sheriff has taken up much more of that space now.
Right.
And we still need more space at the jail too, right?
Yes, we are at a critical mass as far as offices at the jail.
Okay.
We're turning closets into offices and stuff like that. Downtown here is yes, we took up some new space and we are placated at the moment. But we're also never going to be satisfied with it. But our jail is, I don't know. I'd maybe somebody in a uniform behind me can tell me, but I would say we're 6 to 10 offices short as we've grown and built all of these different programs and built these reentry units and teams and everything. Bert Nash has come to our building. We have full-time staffed nursing. They have taken up the space that we used to occupy, and we've slowly shrunk, and then we've expanded into closets and whatnot. So this would create an entirely new open area for us to move into and basically have more administrative space, I guess would be the word. Which is,
and if I could add on to that, at the Judicial and Law Enforcement Center, that space is currently under space design and master planning, and there are no guarantees moving
I might
forward
get evicted.
in terms of how much space is going to be able to be allocated there. Right. I do anticipate that we're going to learn a lot in this downtown space needs analysis study that's going to be very enlightening to the commission in terms of our refreshing how much space we really do need. Right. So my assumption, Sheriff, is that, court security warrants the program areas of your budget that are in the Judicial and Law Enforcement Center. I mean, they're not moving out to the jail.
We will always have a footprint of some sort in that building.
Right. And warrants most of that all is envisioned to stay downtown. This is just jail staff that is cramped up.
But yeah, if at some point we did get evicted from the LEC, we would have somewhere to go. Of course, with notice. But we would
only get 2 days.
Yeah, so that's fine. That's fine. I'd take my goldfish. My whoopee with me. So, but this space. Now, I'm not saying that we could move the sheriff's office into this current space that we're talking about. No, we can't. But this just creates the ability for us to alleviate the pressure that we are currently in as far as office space at the jail. So,
Sheriff, that leads me to another question, because it's come up before. Why do we need to build new space rather than use office space that's currently available in the community? Maybe not in the jail, but in the community. Do you want to respond to that? Because I hear that a lot.
Well, I guess I would need some more context for that, because as a sheriff's office, we unfortunately are a unique animal in that we can't move into any place. So I would be curious how that would look. And I would never say no to anything, but I'm also going to have to look at it through a very unique lens as a law enforcement entity that runs a 186 bed jail. So I would need to, if somebody had a scenario for me, I would be glad to respond.
Well, I think one thing that might be helpful, Sheriff, as we continue to gather more information, is to kind of go into some detail on what specific, position titles are in that would be at the jail that are housed there for offices. And my anticipation is you would not fill that day one.
We would fill most of it.
Okay. So let's get that kind of notice of how many cubes are you putting in? Yep. What staff is that it already exists, and then what capacity would that leave? You bet.
And as part of this drawing that we've looked at, we've maintained our focus on the housing portion of it. And you'll even see the work release and all of that space is basically shell. We have ideas, thoughts, and hopes as far as that goes, what we would love to see in there. And we would be glad to work further towards a plan to what that would actually look like. But frankly, we've kind of prioritized the housing portion of it with that as a project B, so to speak.
And maybe something that I think might be helpful, I don't know, at least it was helpful to me. And when I sat through these conversations with the sheriff's team, I think early on when I thought we were exploring this topic of how do we reuse existing space at the correctional facility, I had very naive non-architecture notions of, well, can't we just go into that unit and, build some walls and put in some plumbing and create cells inside those units. That was what I thought we were talking about. And then very quickly, it just became very clear that that is not possible. And so I don't know, Jeff, if there's something more to just talk about the complexities of why we can't just go in and put in cells in an existing footprint and then build office space somewhere else where it's a lot cheaper to build office space, even if it was attached to the building in a less intensively secure environment.
Right. So it's a good question. So I will share with you, and I didn't say this at the beginning. Sarah reminded me. So I don't know if you saw on any of those items, it said like option 10, 10D, some of them even said that. So we did a plethora of options here as we worked through this. And to Sarah's point, we looked at that work release area and said, okay, how can we create that space, use that space? So to the sheriff's point, it's uniquely designed for work release. And so when you go and try to put units in there, sleeping units in there, and you're trying to provide plumbing, you're basically going to gut the entire space, rip up the entire floor, and then go try to do it again, right? In a confined space. So the idea there was leave what you have, cap it, and utilize it as office space and program space. And it made a lot more sense to be able to do those types of things than to sit there and spend dollars trying to create space that would then need natural daylighting into those cells or into those sleeping areas that we were trying to capture. And how do we weren't even going to get very many beds out of that as well to be able to, and I know that we talked about, well, we're not trying to get beds, but when you hear the sheriff talk about the idea of there's 60 beds that are kind of going away and 56 beds that are coming in that are the right sized beds and the right size spaces, we would not be able to capture that in that space. So those are the things that really turned us to the option that you see today. I also would share that with this option, one of the topics that we talked about was operations. So your current facility is a direct supervision facility. And that's something that and some of you may know or not, I'm not sure. You have officers that are in each of those housing areas. And that is the best way to operate a facility. It's the best, okay? When we're talking about a pre-class type unit, that ability to be able to have people coming and going makes a lot of sense. But the idea is it's a short-term element, right? To then get them to the direct supervision kind of area. So being able to create a control space that had one or two staff in it allowed for the operations to be a tad bit different. So from a cost perspective, as you think about operations, the FTEs are considerably different in that scenario than if you were to have one or two FTE in each of those housing units. You can do the math here. But that was the other part that we worked through as we thought about the design and the effort. Did that help? Okay.
So other than bringing this to us, where else in the community are you talking about this? Because I know even a year ago, I heard through community groups, some of the discussions about needing the flexibility.
Yes. So when I came, with the pandemic, obviously, and I don't think I need to remind anybody at this table about the pandemic and what it brought to us as far as the jail project. But what it did was it kind of solidified for me the fact that we have needs in our facility. This project was not going to work out. And frankly, I'm glad that it didn't work out because I couldn't staff it. It required such a huge manpower or person power situation. So we began looking at how we could work within the parameters of what we have, but while also going about it in a more in what we feel is a transparent and open way. So I actually have reached out to many of the stakeholders, community stakeholders, some of which I have not heard back from, some of have had very good conversations with, but mainly I've invited members of the Justice Matters, their current folks to take tours talk about the things that we have going on, show them, talk and tell stories. And then from that, it is branched out into other members of the community who have a tie to Justice Matters, who have come to me and said, hey, can you come and talk to this group or come and talk to that group? On top of that, I've made a good friend with a young lady by the name of Kirsten Kuhn, who has been very good for sounding board and for just kind of a deep perspective that I wouldn't normally possess. And she has actually shared with me a list of stakeholders that I've reached out to, the local NAACP, the Democratic Socialist Group, the Kansas Appleseed Sunrise Movement, Sunset Alliance, BLM, LFK. I haven't reached out to Artists Helping Homeless. Carl Wu and I talk enough. And if he's on board, I think we're going to be in good shape. So then the Sanctuary Alliance, then on top of that, the League of Women Voters. So I've reached out and spoken with all of them, but I've had most of my conversations with the more intensely organized and connected groups that were part of the last project, to the point where some of them even said, so how do we get this project going? And so I want to say that I feel like I've turned some adversaries into allies when we talk about this project, but I also know that there are still going to be some hurdles. There's going to be some things that we're going to have to discuss and make some hard decisions. But as it stands now, I feel like we're in a much better position for me to take on more of the responsibility of trying to talk this project through with the community and go from that, kind of take it that way instead, maybe take some pressure off the commission.
Sheriff Armstrong, I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us a bit of a snapshot of, so that the 46 work release beds currently. Mm-hmm. I'm going to guess you don't usually have 46 people on work release because it's not as, maybe I'm totally off about that, but it feels like you've got some, here's what I'm trying to get at. This pre-class unit that is sort of largely the centerpiece of a redesign and an addition to the footprint.
Right.
I suppose that 56 number reflects about how many people on an average day you've got in a pre-classification sort of status versus the people that are there either on longer pre-trial, unable to bond out, or post-sentence serving out.
Yes, and as it's been well established through the studies and whatnot, our main driver of population is pre-trial. So folks who are awaiting, who are in on a current charge or a current violation of some sort on a current case, awaiting their sentencing or their trial. We don't have a lot of people serving strictly county time. So what I would say is if this unit was open today, it would be full right away. But what I say that in that it would be pulling people out of the current housing units to reestablish our classification system. So we stay right around 56 in our medium housing unit. That is the capacity, but 12 of them are pre-class. 20 of them are max, who we don't have room for in max, and then the remainder are medium inmates. And so what we would be able to do is we would be able to pull those pre-class out and then move them to this unit and work them through the system. We would be able to pull the women into their different mods as far as and maybe even free up that space. What it would do is, I keep talking about flexibility. We would stay around the same number, but we would have more places to put people to house them where they need to be. And then my dream would be for that medium unit to only house medium folks and stay around 35, 40 folks with a little bit of expansion room for the fluctuation in the population. Same with our max. We could continue to utilize the max, but not have to be pressured and have to move folks, try to pick and choose who is the maxest of the max and put them in here, but then move this max person over here to this unit. This would allow us to actually let the system work itself and allow for the folks to work their way up and or down, mostly down, through the classification systems. So I get it, and I may have kind of lost my answer somewhere in there.
I think that helps. I mean, it reiterates what you've said about the need for flexibility to sort of adapt to how the population changes, which there's a variety of factors for, most of which are not in any way in control of by the sheriff.
Right.
And so, you know, I think it is helpful, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but I do love the topic of work release because it's a curious one. And so is there a snapshot of about how many people you tend to currently have on work release and what that would look like if you were to have this reconfiguration, how that would be different, or, you know, how would you utilize space and accommodate that?
So
do we see numbers going down of work release orders?
Yeah, it's
okay, good.
Currently basically zero.
Okay.
So in 99, we built this. This was a 56 bed open air unit, at which time we housed 10 to 12 people at a time. So I would sit in there on midnight shift with 12 guys that were just sleeping to get ready to go to work in the morning. And then as things changed, it would fluctuate up and down, you know. We would have 15 to 20 men, and then we would have 8 that would be in there on work release. If a female was granted work release, then she had to live out of the current women's housing unit, travel all the way through, come in and out of booking every day. Whereas the men could come and go. They had their own washer and dryer, their own bathroom, showers, everything. So, but when the pandemic hit, and this is not backed by hard numbers, this is my own personal perspective and my experience as I was working there at the time. The courts jettisoned the people right out of work release first, because those were the people who were already integrated into the community and could, and with the invention of just the technology of the ability to track and monitor away from jail, it just really gave us an opportunity to hit the reset button, and then we can talk about the monetary gain of the system through work, the persons that are doing the work is a whole nother topic that could get sideways pretty quickly. But basically what I have said is that I don't want to have work release ever again. I don't believe that it belongs in the jail. I don't want it in my jail. If you order somebody to work for work release, we will do it, because that's what sheriff do. He do what he told. But please find something else and let us use this space and figure out this building in a better way to not have to deal with that.
And I think we haven't talked about work release in a long time. And so I do think it's something that maybe we can find some time to just go back in to refresh the community's mind here. Because really the basics is that if you are capable of working in the community unsecured, why do you need to come back to a secured facility at night to sleep? Mm-hmm. However, there are some weird state laws that occasionally require people to serve bed days. And that's where I think it gets complicated for the sheriff sometimes, that if it's under certain charges, and maybe that's, so, I mean, a lot of people think work release sounds like a great thing, but really it's so great that they mean that they can be in the community, but there are some weird situations, unusual charges that sort of if a person does have a job in the community, we want them to be able to keep that if it's at all possible, but they have bed days to serve. So maybe that nuance would be helpful.
Correct. Yeah. So say so if you're convicted of DUI, you have a mandatory 48, but let's say you get a second DUI. I believe it's a 5-day mandatory. And so we obviously don't want people to come in and lose their job. So what would happen was they would say, you can come in but you can work, you're going to show up Friday evening and you're going to serve until whatever, Tuesday afternoon, or whatever your 5 days are up. But from Monday through Wednesday, you get out at 7 a.m. You have to report back at 5. We get that keeps the disruption of their life. But the judges, I feel, have kind of morphed there and said, okay, you're going to serve 2 days this weekend, 2 days that weekend, or on these days off, and then your final day whenever you tell us, so the judges have been extremely open and good about that, to the point where we've even looked at off-site places for them to serve their bed days in the custody of the sheriff that may not be in jail, so we're trying to work through those nuances, but again, built with the best of intentions, not sustainable and appropriate for our current needs and future, in my opinion.
Thank you. I appreciate that little trip down work release road a little bit. And I just want to put a point on, it's a really good example of how most of county government is based on state statute and what we are told we must do, and that is what judges are held to. So there are some things that local solutions and different options or avenues are still constrained by state laws, which I think that illustrates a good example.
And we are even further down the line in that we do what state law requires. We also do what the judges tell us. And so, and that doesn't even have to be with, it's just whatever the judge says we need to do. And so when it comes to driving the population of the jail, we have very little say in it.
Okay, well, we've hit 5 o'clock. Commissioners, do you have any more questions?
Not a question, just a comment that the condition of the women and what we are offering to them is a discussion that I'm very glad to have out in the open, just the equity. And I know you're doing the best you can with the facility you have and the population that comes to you, but I'm glad for that conversation to continue about how do we solve that inequity.
Well, thank you. That's obviously something that we wanted to promote, but in 99, when we built that, it was built for 14 females and we kept 3 to 5 most of the time. And then somewhere around 16, all of a sudden we were at 25 and nobody can explain it, but all of a sudden we only had this one tiny little space to hold them. And they were the ones that suffered the ultimate cost as far as their abilities to have the same things as the men. So that's something that's been needed to be rectified for a long time.
Okay, Sheriff Armbruster, Jeff, thank you. Appreciate your time. At this point, the commission will recess until our 5:30 business meeting.